Welcome to the World Copper Podcast. I'm Andy Shaw, usually in Australia, but at the moment in the wonderful city of Singapore. And I'm joined today by Juan Guajardo of Plus Mining in Santiago and Simon Hunt of Simon Hunt Strategic Services in the troubled city or the beleaguered city of Dubai. And I do hope that Simon, you and our technician Salman are safe and well. We are in a bit of a hiatus, I think, in these troubled times. But welcome
So far, all is good.
Yeah, well, that's a blessing to hear. This is episode 9 of the World Copper Podcast, and we're going to really focus this month's attention on the CESCO week that has just passed recently in Santiago, and perhaps, well, in the time since we last spoke, the market has been through as much turbulence as I think I remember in all 9 episodes that we've put together so far, but perhaps it's even more turbulent than it was the last time we spoke. So it's a good time to reflect on what the copper industry is thinking about the somewhat weird world we live in and the troubled times. And the CESCO week, it brings together industry players from all quadrants of the industry. Juan Carlos, you've been a very busy man this last 2 or 3 weeks. Perhaps you could give us a little bit of a start here. We seem to be in a market without any real consensus. There's pessimists and optimists all around. We are, of course, in a very uncertain macro environment. So it'd be very interesting to hear your views about, well, what's actually going on from the point of view of what you've heard in Santiago over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy. Great to see you, Simon. I think CESCO week was a fantastic week, and probably more than a week because we started the week before and we ended later than usual. So the first sign, very, let's say, long and very well attended week. And this is important because the uncertainty that you were describing is very high. But the number of attendees from all over the world was a record. So I think that's the first important sign that we need to take into consideration. It's also important to say that this is just a feeling I got. Higher presence of people from Peru and Argentina. I think that's important to say that it seems that the collaboration in the southern part of America is starting to get some traction, and I think it's natural because developing projects is, as we have discussed here, very, very difficult. So coordination is starting to be important. And and yes, your description about the lack of consensus is quite accurate, Andy. And I think it's one of the topics I would like to discuss today. On one side, we have the, let's say, the physical pessimistic view based on a, let's say, short-term elements. But on the other side, the bullish guys sustained description of the market based on financial and geopolitical factors, looking into the long term. So we had this clash of visions, and it was very difficult to get a consensus.
So this comes to the conversations we've had several occasions around whether the prices are too high against being structurally justified.
Exactly. I think that was a centerpiece of debates in Santiago, with no consensus at all, and perhaps a complementary factor in this divergent view is pricing, something that we have also discussed, because on the refined market, you have the growing influence of stockpiling. Actually, during Cisco Week, we had another widening of the arbitrage between New York and London, and the restart of stocking in the U.S.
Something
So
like
again,
$400 a ton.
yes. So more, the discussion around the stockpiling in the United States gained traction again, and I think it's quite important because we have perhaps not a clear price direction in the world market, and of course in the concentrate market, the TCRCs were record low again, below minus 100. So we have also a problem of pricing, and in this case more structural, on what's the real pricing for in the concentrate market. So all these factors together points towards a very, let's say, difficult to read market.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we need to elaborate more in our conversation today.
Sure. Well, hold some of
Yeah,
those thoughts in mind, Simon. You're in a very hot seat, so to speak, at the moment
it's
in
actually it's
Dubai.
quite cold. I'm
Well,
joking.
it's all relative, isn't it? But at least you're still out and about and getting to play tennis. And as
4
I said
days a
earlier,
week.
yeah, I hope you and technician Salman are managing and you're safe in about. We do seem to be in a bit of a hiatus with the conflict. It's very difficult to know where we're going next, and we know your views on this, but perhaps give us a little bit of a refresher as to how you're seeing things from the hot seat, so to speak.
First of all, just to add something that Juan Carlos said, the industry is now switching from just in time to just in case.
Yes.
And that means throughout the large supply chain, from the end user to the fabricator, everyone in that long supply chain is rebuilding inventory or will be rebuilding inventory. And when you work the numbers out, instead of a fabricator having an order book of, say, X, it becomes X times 2 or X times 3. That's what faces us, I think, in 2027 and longer.
Well, that implies that there's a implicit value in those stocks because they're held firmly. And I know your views about the demand destruction side of the equation and the global growth side, but I've been asked constantly in recent times about what do you think the downside price risks are in copper because of this accumulation or perceived accumulation of stock. But what we're talking about here is stockpiling has become more strategic, and that material is now more tightly held and is unlikely to be released in a flood back to the market. So copper prices of today are volatile, but they're likely to be pegged at a certain level, a base.
I think the government stockpiling doesn't come yet.
Yeah.
That comes later, because governments have got bigger issues to contend with that arise out of the virtual closure of the Straits of Hormuz and the intractability of Iran and America to reach any agreement anytime soon. There are stories, rumors, and probably true. For instance, that Iran has submitted a new set of proposals which focus on America, UN the blockade, and we, Iran, will open the straits. The problem with that statement is it's not entirely true. It leaves out Iran's other conditions, which are fundamental to the two parties actually sitting down. And two of those conditions are, before we sit down, we want all our frozen assets redeposited in Iran. And the second condition is, again, before we sit down, we want all the sanctions that have been imposed on us lifted. So when I put all the dots together, I don't see any early reopening of the straits. Now that has massive consequences, both on the production of copper and on the consumption.
And on a lot of other products that really factor
everything.
Even things like helium, which I understand
I
is
know.
used in.
What's helium used for? Chips.
Well, I always thought it was. Yeah, I always thought you just used it to fill up balloons, but apparently it's got more uses than that. It's the next element on the periodic table, hydrogen, and it's used in manufacturing computer chips, I believe.
Yes, but, and sulfuric acid, Andy. Sorry, I forgot to mention that in my introduction.
That is a very
absolutely key.
Yes, absolutely.
Particularly
we've now seen China has put a moratorium on exports of sulfuric acid
as of the 1st of May.
That's it. So Juan Carlos, that must have been a very big topic in Santiago.
It was. I didn't mention in my introduction, but I think the sulfuric acid discussion was probably top 2 or top 3 in the agenda, and that's important. Just for explaining this to our listeners, is sulfuric acid is crucial for SXEW production, where Africa and countries like Chile are absolutely dependent on sulfuric acid. In the case of Chile, 20% of the total production, around 1 million tons of copper, depends on sulfuric acid. So the Hormuz.
If I could butt in, DRC is 83%.
Yes. So it's absolutely crucial. So the Hormuz restrictions plus the ban from China could mean a significant impact in the production of copper. So we can certainly discuss much more of this, but it was a hot topic during the CESCO week.
So what SXEW production, heat leaching, basically using acid, accounts for what? Approximately a little bit under 20% of.
No, 21% last year.
21%. You correct me. Yes, 21% of copper production.
1.1 million tons in Chile out of 5.5 million in total.
Yeah.
So, and something important, Andy. Sorry, something important to explain here, because some people said to me, "Well, Chile produced 2 million tons of copper through SXEW production, and now it's 1.1 million tons. So the dependence on sulfuric acid is lower." But that's misleading, because the head grade reduction and the higher metallurgical complexity is actually increasing the usage of
Acid consumption.
sulfuric acid per ton of copper.
Yes, you need more acid per unit of extraction.
Per unit, exactly. Yeah. So that's something very important to consider.
So obviously a fair chunk of that acid is produced domestically, but what is the reliance on imported acid?
Well, in the case of Chile, the consumption is around 8 million tons of sulfuric acid per year, and Chile imports half of that.
Yes.
And 40% of these imports comes from China. Yeah. So a ban in the case of China could be very, very serious.
That's quite, yeah.
Particularly because the possibility to get acid from other places is not automatic. It's not easy, and will pose a very difficult situation. That because sulfuric acid is also used in the fertilizer industry, therefore in the food industry. So if mining wants more acid, we'll have to compete with the food industry, and that's a very difficult race.
So the bottom line is that the price of acid for miners will remain relatively high, and that other users of that product might get government subsidies or help before miners do.
Yes. Actually, the price is double. At least double in Chile now. And at this level, the cost of acid explains probably 40% of the total cost of production in some miners, and is starting to be a significant challenge.
That's in SXEW operations.
Yes, SXEW operations. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was a sector that was already in sort of steady state decline because of lack of resources, but nevertheless, it's still an important contributor. And elsewhere, as Simon said, Africa is very reliant on that technology.
I think, just to add a few comments on the DRC, China was supplying a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, all the sulfuric acid that the Chinese operations needed in the DRC. But shipping sulfuric acid from China to Central Africa became prohibitive. So the Chinese set up sulfuric acid plants in DRC with the phosphor coming from the Gulf countries through the straits. So now the choice before Beijing, if the straits remain closed for much longer, do we let our operations in the DRC suffer? Or do we ship sulfuric acid out of China at a heavy cost to save those operations?
Yes.
At the moment in the DRC, there are discussions at ministerial level on how we should ration diesel and sulfuric acid. Is it the small miners who will suffer, or will we allow the larger miners to suffer? That discussion is ongoing. I did some work on this and concluded that if China ships sulfuric acid into the DRC, compared to last year, production in the DRC will fall by just under 650,000 tons.
That much?
That much. But if they don't, then the loss of production is 1.6 million tons. So globally, what I do is I have a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. And I do the same for consumption.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that either way, the end result is that we have a deficit this year, best case, of just over 500,000 tons. Worst case, 1.5 million tons.
Yeah.
So like on the demand side as well, it all comes back to one thing. How long does the Straits of Hormuz remain virtually shut?
Well, and if we knew the answer,
you can take your choices.
if we knew the answer to that, Simon, we'd all be driving around in fancy Ferraris. But
Yes.
just to close the loop a little bit on the acid story, TCRCs, or for the listeners, treatment and refining charges, basically the smelters, custom smelters charge to miners for processing that material. Those are now negative to a much larger extent than I expected, and they've continued to be negative to extents that I didn't think were sustainable. We haven't really seen too much of a response from smelters outside China yet, other than the Onohama decision, which you could argue was already in the mix. That must have been another very heated topic of debate in Santiago.
Yes, it was, Andy, and we can't forget that the smelters are surviving thanks to sulfuric acid. So, what is a very paradoxical situation? Smelters are running for more concentrates,
Yes.
therefore putting additional pressure on the TCRCs. And I think that's one of the reasons we are seeing, much lower TCRCs now.
So down to what? I mean, we've even seen prices, TCs, treatment charges, that is that side of the equation, below $100 a ton of concentrate.
Yes.
There's obviously a lot of side terms that have helped, and gold prices are obviously a big part of that as well. But there's the two-tier market has developed, and I think we had a conversation on this before about, well, has the benchmark system broken down? Or if it's still there, will it eventually break down because it can't be sustainable in this market?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I said at the beginning, Andy. That I see the pricing in both the refine and concentrate market is starting to be completely different of what we had before. And my question is, if the benchmark system is done, we will move into a new generation of bilateral agreements between miners and smelters. And therefore, it will be very hard to know what exactly the mood of the market. And also, it will be much difficult to know what's exactly going on. And it will be a big challenge for all of us.
Yeah. I mean, if you had to sort of make a guess on that, I mean, Chile is obviously investing or planning to invest money in replacing smelting capacity. The China fleet, as we've said before, is probably pretty safe. Elsewhere, it's very hard to imagine anyone building any more processing capacity in a great hurry, and we could lose some existing smelters. We haven't lost many. I mean, Passar is obviously shut, isn't it? Onohama has announced that it's going to switch.
Let me make some trouble here, because yes, from an economic perspective, building new smelting capacity probably makes no sense. with some exceptions. For example, in the case of Chile, I can explain Chile is actually replacing very old and inefficient capacity. So from that perspective, could make sense. But what was also an interesting topic of discussion in Santiago is the geopolitical factor.
Yeah, so it becomes a strategic play.
Where do you want to invest? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, the US wants to divert the coupling from China's from the Chinese supply chain, and that could imply pressures or incentives to build new smelting capacity in the Americas.
Yes.
I'm not talking about only Chile. It could be Peru, could be Mexico, could
America
be
as well.
Yes. So if that happens, the let's say the overcapacity around the world will be amazing, and the smelting business will be something completely different.
So then you end up. I mean, again, coming back for the benefit of the listeners, the benchmark system is a legacy of Japan putting in place smelters, and that process effectively allowed the development of mines without having to build a smelter in the source of the mine, which is it triggered mining expansion, and there's a cost that went with that, which is treatment charges. And there's also a financing structure that went with that around equity participation and financing of development of new mines. We have talked about this before with Chinese participation in offshore projects to do just that thing. What we're looking at here potentially is that there's a bit of a shift in that pattern, is there not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Simon, perhaps you can elaborate, but I fully agree. And I think that this is a structural change, in my opinion. And we need to understand the consequences. I think we are not ready to take this new situation.
I think
Simon, are we going to see a fleet of smelters built in the United States? He says with tongue in cheek.
I would not be at all surprised if we don't see the El Paso smelter being brought on stream again, updated and brought on stream again. I can't remember the capacity figure. It's huge. 600,000 tons from memory.
That's the refinery. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, there are a lot of
smelter. The smelter fed the refinery.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
I think that America wants to be self-contained, just like China wants to be self-contained. And to do that, they have to build new smelters and refineries.
And I think we have seen that the arbitrage has reappeared, which implies there's still latent worries about a potential tariff on imports of refined copper, and we thought that had gone away, didn't we? That it didn't make sense to impose an import tariff on effectively cathode imports into the US. But a tariff tells us something else, does it not?
I'm not so sure.
I mean, the arbitrage. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not so sure whether it's telling the right story.
Yeah.
Because it was the copper industry itself that persuaded Washington that introducing a tariff on cathode would be hurtful to the domestic manufacturing industry. So what's changed?
Politicians.
Or maybe money.
Yeah, but it's important to say, guys.
It's part of the money game.
Yeah. Something important to say is that this reopening of the arbitrage window was triggered by a sort of new or adjustment in the regulation that the U.S. Made a few weeks ago. They basically made some adjustments saying, well, if your product contains more than 50% of copper, you are subject to the tariff or not. So what the market is seeing is that these adjustments are just confirming the policy, and therefore they do not expect any, let's say, release in the tariff system around copper in the U.S. So that was the discussion.
I suppose the critical thing in there surely is who's actually making the decisions on that. Simon, you referenced a deep study of the benefits or otherwise of imposing a tariff. I think there's a quote by I think it's probably by Churchill, but no one's really sure, that the Americans always do the right thing after trying everything else, or something along those lines. And we could probably use that on a lot of different fronts. But is there wisdom in the ranks around the impact on the copper industry? Now, the copper industry has said it doesn't make sense, but does that matter?
It depends who President Trump is listening to on that particular moment.
I'm not going to say anything on that.
No, I'm not going to add anything.
Well, demand uncertainty is still in the equation. We've talked about supply side constraints. We ain't growing copper supply in a great hurry. Juan Carlos, you've talked about the impact on the process of adding more supply. The other topic in Santiago, was there a more positive outlook on, let's say, fast-tracking opportunities to bring supply on more quickly?
Oh, yeah, definitely. One of the highlights during the week was the new governments in Latin America. We had Mr. Milei in Argentina, a couple of years in power, developing a completely new institutionality for mining. So that was one an important factor. But of course, in the case of Chile, we had a new government starting in March. Again, explaining several pro-business policies and permitting, fast-tracking projects was one of the stars in the announcements. We have also the election in Peru. We are in between of the first and second round, and the expectation is that the election could also help the country to start moving on. So, yeah, in summary, the expectations are very high in terms of the political change, although the instability in Latin America is the big question mark. You could have very good governments and very good policies, but if the social framework is not supporting these changes, you could move very little. No? So I think that's a big question mark that we have to see in Chile, Argentina, and Peru in the next years.
Juan Carlos, is
Yes.
that a move to the right?
Yes,
across Latin America?
And not only right, Simon, I would say very, very right. No, that's important, guys, because we have in Latin America, we have had swings from left to right, very often. But this time is different because the right-wing governments in power have learned the lessons from previous right-wing governments, and they are ready to go straight to the cultural battle with the left-wing governments. What I'm trying to say, this time the governments basically don't fear to clash with the left-wing opposition and try to promote pro-business policies. That's an important difference.
What do you think will there be a swing in Brazil?
Brazil is a different case, guys. Brazil is by far the most powerful country in Latin America. They have their own dynamics. They recently announced that they can produce a war jet of first generation by their own. So they have more autonomy in the geopolitical context. That's the first point, Simon. And on the political landscape, is probably the most polarized country right now in the region. They are 50-50 between left and right, and therefore it's very hard to expect and it's very hard to forecast something there, Simon.
That's why I asked you the question.
Yeah, well,
look,
right now,
let me bring us back down to earth a little bit. We are on time, or out of time. In the context of Brazil, we might change our forecasting and say, will they win the next World Cup in the United States, which is coming up very soon? And as an Englishman, I'm hoping that England will win that, but we'll lose somewhere in the final stages on penalties to Germany or someone. As usual. Look, I think we should call this a wrap. And final summary, maybe start with you, Juan Carlos. Where do you see copper going again? Not by next Friday, but let's say over the next month or two.
Wow, wow,
up and down.
That's we are in a period of high turbulence, and this is very hard to say. Everything depends on first of all on the Hormuz situation. If the crisis continues, I think the economy will start to suffer, and the mining industry will start to have big consequences. So, from a macro perspective, we'll have a deterioration, but on the copper supply side, we'll have a big impact in production. So we have two factors going in different directions. So based on that, I think I'll stay more or less in the same level that we are now. Difficult to say a direction now.
I couldn't disagree with that particularly. It's impossible to forecast, like I've said often. Simon, I know your views over a slightly longer time frame, but shorter term period.
Well, short term, I think we go higher because it's supply that impacts the market first.
Yes.
But I think that by the middle of the year or a little bit later, we will see consumption being significantly impacted. It already is being impacted in Asia outside China.
Yeah.
Because the shipping times to Asia are much shorter than to Europe and America. So I then think we will have a pretty large correction in price by the end of the year. And then we go into an inflationary syndrome where prices may rise to stupid levels, but reduce them to $20, $26, and then be back to where we are now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my view on it is as diverse as all those. I'm much more certain about who's going to win the World Cup, the Soccer World Cup in the USA, than I am about where copper's going. Of course, that's going to be England as an Englishman. But
who is going to win it?
I think it's our time. It's England's time. But Juan Carlos, Chile. Oh,
Well,
I'm so
no.
sorry. Chile didn't get into it.
Neither Chile nor Italia, classified
Well,
to the World Cup.
that's
So
a shame.
I'm an orphan now, but I will bet on Portugal this time.
Portugal. Okay. Well, that's a good one. And sport is and football, as it's properly called, not soccer, is a very unifying sport. And on that note, I'd like to end with calling this a wrap. And unification through sport and through the wonderful world of soccer is a brilliant thing in our troubled times. It's very interesting that the World Cup is going to be held in the United States of America and Canada and Mexico. And it will be interesting to see whether the Iran football club, Iran team is allowed to play, which I hope they will, to be honest, in a sport.
I do too. But American politics will enter into it.
Well, we'll see. Maybe the world of football can step over those barriers. I do hope.
That would be wonderful.
In the meantime, when shall we three meet again in thunder, lightning, or in rain? Probably next week when the hurly-burly's done. But I don't think the hurly-burly will be done very quickly, as you say, Simon. Thank you for listening in to us on the World Copper Podcast. If you want to find out more, check us out on our website, www.theworldcopper.com. Safe travels in the meantime, and we hope to see you again soon.